A planet in neutral dignity can either be Swapna, half awake, or Sushupti, fast asleep, and that really depends on whether the planet is in a natural friend or natural enemy sign. Either way, the planet is in neutral dignity and therefore in an environment that is neither fully supportive nor completely hostile. With neutral dignity, there's a sense of indifference because something feels barely good enough to maintain. And so overall, the neutral dignity barely produces moderate results. And so in the first case, when a planet is in the natural friend sign and a temporary enemy sign, then it is Swapna and half awake. And it feels comfortable, obviously, because it is in a friendly relationship with its Lord. But because the Lord is also a temporary enemy, the support it gets is not consistent. And so the planet is in a compatible environment, but gets into situations that cause friction and setbacks. And so overall, it's just not able to produce consistent results. And so the planet in neutral dignity walks a fine line of maintaining its indications while having to manage fluctuations and uncertainties. In our Venus example, this would mean that the marriage environment is generally supportive, but because the Lord becomes a temporary enemy, there will be misunderstandings and disagreements. Venus is here not anymore delighted or content, as it is in great friend or friend dignity. There will be more regular disagreements. There's a lack of deeper emotional connection, and therefore the interactions are going to feel like obligations. And so overall, when Venus is in a neutral dignity, then there's a sense of indifference. And other auspicious and inauspicious influences are going to sway Venus one or the other way. A planet can also be in neutral dignity when it is in a natural enemy sign and a temporary friend sign. And this is when it is Sushupti, or sleeping. And here the planet is in a challenging environment to start with, but because it is a temporary friend with the owner, there's a sense of cooperation that makes the difficulty less. And so here the planet is in a naturally undesirable environment, but then tries to adapt and make the most out of it. And so in our Venus example, this would mean that there is a lack of compatibility between two people, but there is some relief that comes from a willingness to cooperate due to concrete benefits. Right? So this would basically be an undesirable marriage, but circumstantially there are advantages which might be the reason why a person might still want to get married. And this is when Venus is also in neutral dignity. It's not happy there, and it's only barely maintaining its role. And again, planets conjunct and aspecting Venus, who is here only with neutral dignity, will dictate the end result. Enemy dignity occurs when a planet is in a natural neutral sign and a temporary enemy sign. And so here the planet is tolerated in the natural neutral sign, but not welcomed by the Lord, who has become its temporary enemy. And so the environment becomes unsupportive, and the planet feels restricted and frustrated. It can still function at a basic level, but whatever it does feels awkward. And so this will then cause inconsistency and dissatisfaction. And so in our Venus example, when Venus is Swapna and tired in enemy dignity, then the relationship becomes reduced to routine. Venus might still try to get love, but the environment is going to be cold and unresponsive. And since it is only in a natural neutral sign, there can only be affections that are absolutely necessary to maintain the relationship, but in general there is a lack of emotional fulfillment. When Venus is here in an enemy sign, a lot of compromise has to be made in the marriage, and making it last becomes a real challenge. A planet is in Sushupti, slumbering Avasthas, when it is in a natural enemy sign or in its debilitation sign. And in this state, the planet is unconscious and devoid of the ability to act effectively. So, in great enemy dignity, a planet is in a completely hostile environment where it is severely obstructed, right? It is in a natural enemy sign and a temporary enemy sign. And so it faces constant opposition and feels isolated and powerless. Even its basic functioning becomes difficult because every action gets challenged. And so the results of a planet in great enemy dignity are negative and inconsistent, and the planet gets frustrated and causes a lot of problems and setbacks. And so when Venus is in great enemy dignity, it feels unloved and misunderstood. The marriage becomes confrontational, and the emotional toll it takes inevitably leads to a growing apart of the couple. The pain tends to become too much to maintain a close relationship. And so the great enemy dignity in general indicates that the compatibility is deficient, and the circumstances surrounding the marriage are going to add to the disappointment. A planet in debilitation is completely lost and disempowered. It can be compared to someone who is held captive in enemy territory, and as a captive, it is stuck and isolated and cut off from its source of energy. There's a sense of loss of identity, and there's nothing positive it can do in the situation, right? It can't fulfill its role anymore, and it's simply condemned to suffer extreme hardships. And this is really what a debilitated planet is. It has to operate in an environment that is opposed to its innate nature, and therefore it will fail. And in fact, a debilitated planet functions at such a low level that all by itself it can cause loss and destruction. In our Venus example, when Venus is in Virgo, it feels deeply hurt in marriage. Right? It has a superficial idea about love and then ends up in toxic relationships. Right? It gets obsessed with practical concerns and neglects the true essence of love, which is that love is experienced by two people in the present moment, where it can flow effortlessly and spontaneously. For Venus in Virgo, romantic expressions are calculated and a duty or act of service. And so when Venus is at its lowest point in debilitation, it can become hopeless and stop believing that a relationship can get better, or that there even is such a thing as love in general. And so they might decide to leave, or if they decide to continue, then they look at it in a very practical way and sacrifice their emotional needs for their material security. And so the solution is really that they need to be a bit more humble and introspect and learn a major lesson about life, which is that imperfections are a normal part of life, and accept their partner for who they are. And then they can start to appreciate their partner and maybe for the first time have real intimate moments carrying them forward in the right direction.